Hello, in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about how to approach the Act 3 text-based response. So let's take a look at the prompt. How does Reverend Hale change from Act 1 to Act 3 in The Crucible by Arthur Miller? So what I want you to notice first is that we are dealing with Reverend Hale, right? That's the character that we're focusing on. So we only want to talk about him. Okay, and then the next part of the prompt I want you to notice is change. Okay, so we are going to be comparing his actions between, Act 1 and Act 3. How can we show our reader how Hale changes? That's what we want to be thinking about as we are writing this particular text-based response. And as always, when we are writing a text-based response, we always want to make sure that we include the act information so that we let our reader know where this information is coming from. We obviously want to include the title as well as the author. Okay, so in this text-based response, we're going to make sure that we have our answer or our claim, citing our evidence, having explanation and reasoning, more evidence, and more explanation and reasoning. What I want you to notice about this text-based response is that our first piece of evidence is going to come from Act 1. Act 1, we want to be able to show that compare and contrast. So we want to show his actions or his thinking in Act 1 and what they were like, and explain that, obviously. And then in Act 3, we want to find a quote that shows that different action, that different thought process. I'm going to go back up here and I'm actually going to add the word actions or thoughts, because we could compare his sort of thinking. Okay, so where do we see him making these great changes between Act 1 and Act 3? So let's continue to read the directions a little bit farther. Used two of the quotes provided in your response. Be sure to reread that section in which the quote came from. The page numbers have been provided. There's also additional information in the packet explaining a little bit of background about Reverend Hale. That's on pages 182 to 184. That gives us that actual historical information about him. It's highly suggested that you take the time to read those 2 pages to help you truly understand Hale and where he was coming from, so that when you are explaining this change that he makes between Act 1 and Act 3, that you have a great foundational understanding of him as a character. So you'll notice in this next 2 boxes, you have several quotes in which you can choose from Act 1. So you're going to want to use one of these quotes to show how he was in Act 1. Okay, and then you're going to obviously want to explain that. Then in your next piece of evidence, you have several quotes to choose from Act 3. Okay, and these quotes should show that comparison or that contrast in his actions. Okay, so when you are writing your answer or claim sentence, I want you to make sure, and I'm going to add this as a little note, that you provide a specific answer to the question or prompt provided. So go back and look at that prompt. How does Reverend Hale change from Act 1 to Act 3 in The Crucible? You're going to want to answer how he changes. Does he change for the better? Does he change in a positive way? Does he change in a negative way? Do his thoughts change? Do his actions change? How does he change? Okay. And I want you to make sure, let me go back up, that you include, write his name, Act 1, Act 3, the title, and the author. All of those things are absolutely necessary in your answer claim. Then you're going to cite your piece of evidence from Act 1. Remember that you have several quotes to choose from. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 different quotes to choose from that you could put right here. You have to embed your quote, folks, which means that you should probably go back and reread that section. Ask yourself, who was he speaking to? What was happening when he said those words? Give your reader context in which they can understand this quote. Imagine that this person doesn't know a lot about hail. So you have to ask yourself, if you use this quote, who was he talking to when he says they must be, they are weighted with the authority? You're going to want to make sure that you explain that the word they are actually books, right? Who was he saying that to? What was happening in the play? Okay. And then in your explanation and reasoning, you're going to want to explain his character traits in Act 1 based on this piece of evidence. Okay. You're going to want to provide as much explanation as evidence. You want them to be equal. So if you have a 2-line piece of evidence, your explanation needs to be equal to or greater than. You don't want to have less explanation than you have evidence. You want that to be balanced, either an equal amount or more explanation and reasoning, okay? Then you're going to grab a piece of evidence from Act 3, and you have 4 different options to choose from, okay? Make sure that you, again, embed, okay, and follow this same model of telling us who was Reverend Hale speaking to? What was happening in the play? Make sure that you're giving us context in your embedding. And then this is where you're going to explain the change. How has this piece of evidence shown us, the reader, his change? Okay, and again, you're going to want to make sure that this explanation is equal to or greater than the amount, the amount of evidence that you provided. Okay, so if you provide 4 lines of evidence, you're going to want to provide at least 4 lines of explanation. It is really important that we are not too quote heavy, okay? That we provide enough explanation, really delving into that great change that he makes. And then before you submit your assignment, I highly encourage you to check for spelling, punctuation, and capitalization. Remember that Google Docs is really great, and when you misspell something, it puts a little red line underneath that lets you know, hey, you misspelled this. I want you to make those changes. I want you to make sure that you have complete sentences with proper punctuation, okay? Please rewatch this video at any time if you get confused of what you should be doing during the Act 3 text-based response.